Hey people, this will be a 5-part series where we'll be covering modeling, texturing, geometry nodes, lighting, and compositing to make this floating island render. We'll also be working in Eevee to make this accessible to more people. Let's get started. Throughout the videos, you'll be able to see what keys I'm pressing here. First, we want to go to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, and search for ANT Landscape and enable it. Then exit out of Preferences. Now, press A to select all and press X to delete. In the top right of the viewport, click this down arrow and enable Cavity. Next, press Shift-A for the Add menu. Go to Mesh and select Landscape. To zoom in on your selected object, press period on the number pad or rebind it in the key map settings here. Without clicking anything else, open the Properties panel in the bottom left. Once open, set the noise type to Planet Noise and the noise basis to New Perlin. Next, set the height to -1 and the minimum to -1.5. You can now change the random seed until you find one you like. This will be the bottom half of your floating island. Once done, close the Properties panel and press 1 on the number pad to switch to front view. If you don't have a number pad, you can rebind it in the key map settings here. Now press Shift-A, go to Mesh, and add a cube. Then press S to scale and Z to lock the scale to the Z axis. Scale it until it covers the top portion of the island. Now select the island, go to the Modifiers tab, search for the Boolean modifier, and set the target as the cube you created. Whilst hovering over the modifier, press Ctrl-A as the shortcut to apply it. Now you can select the cube and delete it. Next, select the island, press Tab to switch to edit mode, and with it all selected, press G to grab and Z to lock the movement to the Z axis. Now move it up and align the top of the model with a horizontal X-axis line. You may need to zoom in to get it just right. Switch back to object mode, press Shift-D to duplicate, left-click to confirm, S to scale, Z to lock the axis, and scale it until it flips to a position you're happy with. This will be the top half of your floating island. Now select both, press Ctrl-A, and apply the scale. Then press Ctrl-J to join them into one object. After joining them together, press this down arrow next to the overlays icon and enable statistics. This will allow you to keep track of how many polygons are in your scene as well as per object. After doing this, go to the Modifiers tab and search for the Remesh modifier. Keep it set to voxel and set the voxel size to 0.025. The lower the voxel size, the more polygons your object will have. Try to have a similar number of polygons to what your original mesh had. After putting in your numbers, tick Shade Smooth and apply the modifier. Next, we want to smooth out where the top and bottom of our island bridge together. To do so, click this drop-down arrow in the top left and select Sculpt Mode. You can use F to change the scale of the brush, then hold down Shift and left-click to smooth out where the two parts bridge together. When done, switch back to Object Mode. Now, we want to add a tree model to our island. To do so, head to the Polyhaven website. Click the Assets button, and in the search bar, type Trees. They have a few different options to choose from, and all of which are completely free. Once you've chosen the one you like, you can set the quality at which you'd like the models, and make sure the export is set to Blend File and hit Download. You will also want to download the Jacaranda tree if you haven't already. This will make sense in a moment. After downloading both, be sure to extract the files. To import our tree with the right setup, go to File and click Append. From here, locate where you saved the files to and click on the blend file. From here, click Collections, select all 3 collections, and hit Append. This will bring the tree into Blender with the correct geometry setups. Now, you'll want to select the little branches that came with it, which act as the instance objects, and in the outliner, press the eye and camera icon of their collection groups to disable them from the render and viewport. Next, you'll want to scale and adjust the tree model to suit your island. In the Modifier tab, you can change some of the tree's settings, but we'll worry more about that later. Once you're done with that, we want to import the Jacaranda tree. It's the same process as before. Go to File, Append, locate the blend file, and this time, we only want the mesh. So select the Mesh folder and choose the tree file. We'll be using this as the roots of our island. Before adjusting it, press 7 on the number pad to go to the top view. Switch to Edit Mode and press Alt-Z to turn X-ray mode on. Now we want to box select about half of the mesh. Press X and delete the vertices. Following this, in the Modifier tab, add a Decimate modifier, keep it set to Collapse, and set the ratio to 0.3. Then apply the modifier. This is all in the name of reducing the poly count, as we won't need that many. From here, you can scale and rotate the branches and place them at the underside of the island to appear as roots. If you would like more of the roots, you can duplicate the same one using Alt-D. This will create a linked duplicate and won't increase the poly count. To take this one step further, select the branches and go into Edit Mode. Press L to select a linked area of branches, press Shift-D to duplicate, then press P and separate by selection. Select the separate branches, switch to Edit Mode, select the top vertices, press Shift-S, and choose Cursor to Selected. Then back in Object Mode, right-click, go to Set Origin, and set it to the 3D cursor. This will now make the pivot point where the 3D cursor was. Now place these branches so they appear to hang off the edges of the island, and duplicate them around a few times with Shift-D. Be sure to vary the scale and rotation slightly each time. To add some life to our floating island, we're going to add some animal models to it, and as this isn't a sculpting-focused tutorial, we're going to be generating our animal models using AI. Head over to the Hyperhuman website and register an account. You'll get a few free tokens upon registering, so this part is completely free. Select the bounding box option, press Handcraft Your Own, and adjust the dimensions to roughly the scale of your animal. This can be adjusted when we're inside Blender. Once you're happy with the dimensions, click Confirm. Next, click the text input box and input what animal you'd like to generate alongside any other details you'd like to include. Then hit the tick button. It'll now generate an image and your model will be based off of it. You can regenerate the image until you find one you're happy with, then hit the tick again. Once done, hit Generate. It will now create a 3D preview of your model. If you would like to rig the animal, come to the Advanced Settings, select Reset, select Rest, and click Redo to generate an A or T pose of your model. Other than that, select the poly count, I recommend 5,000 as it will be far from the camera, and hit Confirm. Once that's done, it will generate the geometry for your model. If there's anything you'd like to change, you can come to the Mesh Editor and make any of the adjustments you need. We can now use the same image to create a material for our model and click Generate. Once the material has loaded, click Confirm. Finally, for the export settings, keep Base Model ticked. Set it to FBX, PBR Material, 1K Textures, and hit Download. After downloading, be sure to unzip the file. Head back into Blender, press F4, go to Import, and select FBX. Now locate the animal FBX file you downloaded and import it to Blender. From here, simply scale the model relative to your island and place it where you think looks good. You can repeat this process as many times as you'd like for different animals across the scene. For our final step of the modeling process, we're going to add in some rocks. To do this, press F4 and go to Preferences. In the Add-ons tab, search for the Extra Mesh Objects add-on and enable it. Once enabled, press Shift-A, go to Mesh, and select the rock generator. Before making any changes or clicking off, open the Properties panel in the bottom left. At the bottom of the panel, set the preset to Asteroid. At the moment, the poly count for the rock is far too high. To fix that, set the detail and the display level to 2. If you don't like the look of the rock, you can untick Use Random Seed and play with a few different ones to see what you like. Once you've got your perfect rock, scale it down to match your island and create a few linked duplicates using Alt-D and place them around the underside of the island. Be sure to vary the scale and rotation slightly as you're going. That's all for this part. Welcome to part 2 of the floating island, where we'll be focusing on texturing. A file containing everything I use in this course will be available for you guys. Let's get started. As we'll want to start by focusing on the island, select it, then press Ctrl-I to inverse the selection and press H to hide. Now move your cursor to the top left of the viewport until you see this cross icon appear. Then click and drag your cursor out to create a new window to work in. From there, click this icon in the top left to change the editor type of the window and set it to the shader editor. Then press N to close this side panel. We also want to make sure our viewport is set in a good position so we can clearly see what we're doing to the island. Press T to close the sidebar and click these two overlapping circles in the top right to disable the overlays. Next, hold Z over the viewport and set it to Material Preview. And finally, enable Ray Tracing in the Render Properties panel. Before starting with the texturing, press F4, go to Preferences, go to Add-ons, then search for and enable the Node Wrangler add-on. We can now go ahead and create a new material in the shader editor and give it a new name. For the moment, we can full screen the shader editor by hovering over it and press Ctrl and Spacebar. Select the principled BSDF, press Shift D to duplicate it and move it underneath. Select the color of the new one and make it something dark. Now select the material output and move it to create some space. Select both principled shaders and press Ctrl and 0 on the number pad to join them with a Mix Shader node. If you don't have a number pad, you can rebind the button in the Preferences. From here, press Shift A and search for the separate XYZ node. Now do the same and search for the color ramp node. Connect the Z value into the factor of the color ramp, then connect the color ramp into the factor of the mix shader. Next, select the separate XYZ and press Ctrl T to set up a texture coordinate and mapping node. This shortcut will only work with the Node Wrangler add-on enabled. Delete the image texture it created, then plug the mapping node into the separate XYZ and change the texture coordinate input from UV to object. Let's now tab back into our viewport by pressing Ctrl and the spacebar. By playing with a color ramp, we can begin to see some separation in the materials, but it's not yet what we're looking for. Press Shift A again and search for the Noise Texture node. Connect the object value of the texture coordinate to the vector of the noise texture. Then select both Noise Texture and the separate XYZ node and press Ctrl and 0 on the number pad to join them with a Mix Color node. Click the arrow on the Mix Color node to open it up and ensure the Z value of the separate XYZ is set to the A value of the Mix Color node. Next, click on the Blending node and change it from Mix to Lighten. And now connect the result value to the factor of the color ramp node. From here, play with the color ramp pointers again. You'll be able to notice the separation in materials along the Z-axis. The different colored areas resemble where the grass of the floating island will show, as well as where the rocky areas of the island will show. You can also play with the factor value of the Mix Color node for additional control over the two materials. After you're happy with the positioning of your materials, we're going to need to get some textures. Head over to the Ambient CG website and search up Rock Materials. They've got plenty of great free ones on there. Once you found the one you like, select the quality at which you'd like to download it at. Now you'll want to find a grass material and do the same thing. Be sure to also unzip both of the files you downloaded. Back inside Blender, select one of the principled BSDFs. Remember that the colors will be replaced with the PBR textures. In my case, the dark color on top will be the grass, so I will select that principled BSDF and press Ctrl-Shift-T. From here, locate where you saved the grass texture file, select all of the textures, and load them in. This will automatically set up all of your materials in one click. Now repeat this step for the other principled BSDF to load in your other texture. If your texture doesn't look correct, tab into Edit mode, make sure everything is selected, press U, and select Cube Project. From here, you can still adjust the color ramp and mix color nodes to change up the positioning and blending of the materials. Now that we're finished with the island texturing, press Alt-H to unhide everything from your scene. For the animals, select one, give it a new material and a new name. Similar to the previous steps for the island, select the principled BSDF, press Ctrl-Shift-T, and locate where you saved the animal file. With it, there should have come some textures. Select them all and import them in. Then repeat this step for any other animal assets you have. For the rocks, we want to give them the same material as our island. Again, if they look a bit off, tab into Edit mode, make sure everything is selected, press U and select Cube Project. And that is everything when it comes to texturing. I'll see you guys in the next part for geometry nodes. Welcome to part 3 of the floating island where we'll be focusing on geometry nodes. Let's get started. Similar to the previous part, we'll want to start by focusing on the island itself. So, select it, press Ctrl I to inverse the selection, then press H to hide. Next, press Shift A and we'll want to add in a cube. Move it to the side, scale it down with S. Then press S and Shift Z to lock the scale to the X and Y axis. From here, tab into Edit mode and select the bottom face of the cube. Now press Shift S and choose Cursor to select it. Then tab back into Object mode, right-click, go to Set Origin, and set it to the 3D cursor. This will now make our pivot point to where we set the cursor. After that, press Ctrl A and apply the rotation and scale of your cube. Similar to the previous part again, move your cursor to the top left of the viewport until you see a cross. Then click and drag it out to create a new window to work in. Now click the icon in the top left and set the editor type to the Geometry Node Editor and press N to close the side panel. From here, select your island and create a new geometry node setup. The first node we'll want to add is Distribute Points on Faces. This will scatter points across the island, but our face disappeared. To fix this, we need to add a Join Geometry node. Connect the group input to the Join Geometry node to get our island back. Now, instead of these points to be scattered, we want it to be this cube. To do this, let's add an Instance on Points node and connect it after the Distribute Points on Faces. Be sure to also set the distribution method to Poisson disk. We now need to import our cube data to be taken as our instance object. Simply click and drag the cube from the outliner into the geometry node window. Then all we'll have to do is connect the geometry output of the cube to the instance input. As you can see, everything still looks like pillars, so let's get to work on that. First off, connect these two rotation values. Now add a Rotate Euler node and slot it in between those two rotation values. Also, add a Random Value node and connect it to the Rotate By input of the Rotate Euler node. Set the data type to vector, then begin to play with the values until you get a rotation which you think looks good. We'll now need to add some randomization to the scale. To do so, add a Noise Texture node as well as a Map Range node. Connect the Map Range node to the instance scale, then connect the color of the Noise Texture node to the value of the Map Range node. Again, play with the numbers until you have something which looks good in regards to scale randomization. To get a better look at our scattering so far, increase the density max value. From here, you can still go back and adjust your scale settings, as well as playing with the noise texture value to get the right look. As we don't want every part of our island to be covered in grass, we can define the different sections using Weight Paint. To get started, we'll disconnect Instance on Points from the Join Geometry node. By hovering your viewport, press Ctrl-Tab and select Weight Paint Mode. By pressing F and dragging your mouse, you'll be able to control the size of the brush. And by pressing Shift F, you'll be able to control the strength. Now you can begin to use the brush to define the areas in which you want there to be grass on your island. By holding Ctrl and left-clicking, you can reverse the brush and take weight away from certain areas. Here's a basic visualization of what the colors mean. Once you're done, come to the Data Properties panel. This vertex group is the area we just weight painted, which will be used to define the grassy areas of our island. By double-clicking it, we can rename it to Grass. Now we can switch back to Object mode. In the Geometry Node Editor, we can now connect our instances back to our Join Geometry node. We now need to tell our geometry setup to use the vertex group we created. For this, we'll have to add a new socket to our Group Input node. To do this, press N to open the side panel. In the Group Sockets tab, click on the Input group and add a new input. Give it a description as well as a similar name by double-clicking. To link the vertex group to our new input, come to the Modifiers tab and click this toggle. Then set the input as the vertex group we created. Now simply connect our new group input socket to the density factor. For our final step, we're going to replace the cubes with actual grass. To do this, head to the Polyhaven website and look up their plant assets, which are completely free. Once you've found one you like, select the texture quality, set the file type to FBX, and hit Download. Be sure to also unzip the downloaded file. Back inside Blender, press F4, go to Import, and select FBX. locate where you saved the file and import the FBX model. To set up the textures, select one of them and the shader editor. Select the principal BSDF and press Ctrl-Shift-T. With the download, there should have come some textures. Locate them, select them, and import them. Next, select all of the imported plants, press M, create a new collection, and give it a suitable name. Be sure to also apply the scale and rotation of the plants. In the outliner, you'll also want to disable the group visibility from the viewport and render. Back inside the geometry node editor, we want to delete the cube object info node. Then in the outliner, click and drag the plant collection group you created into the geometry node editor. Tick Separate Children and Reset Children, then plug it into the instance's input. And finally, tick Pick Instance. From here, you can go back and adjust the scale settings as well as density values until you get the right look for your island. You can also change up the weight paint and be able to see your plants being added in real time. Once done, press Alt-H to unhide everything. Select one of the branches you placed at the edge of your island. Go to the Data Properties tab and remove all of the current vertex groups. In the Modifier tab, search for the Geometry Node modifier. Next, press Ctrl-Tab and switch to Weight Paint mode, then begin to apply weight onto the object. Now select the toggle in the Modifier tab and set it to the new vertex group you just painted. This will now add the plant models to your branches. That's all for this part. I'll see you guys in part 4 for lighting and rendering. Welcome to part 4 of the floating island, where we'll be focusing on lighting and rendering. Let's get started. The first thing we want to do is press Shift-A and add our camera. Now grab it and move it along the axis you want it to point at. Press Alt-R to reset the rotation of the camera, R and either X or Y, depending on where you've moved your camera, and point to face your island. Now press 0 on the number pad to switch to camera view and further adjust your camera to get the shot established. Once done, come to the camera settings and under the viewport display tab, set the passpart 2 to 1 so we can completely focus on what our camera is seeing. Now that our camera has been set up, let's set up the rest of our scene. I recommend splitting your display, one for the viewport and one for the camera shot. Be sure to also set your camera shot to rendered view. First, we'll add an HDRI to our scene to get some basic lighting in. To do this, go to the World Properties and set the color input to Environment Texture. Now, you'll want to press Open and locate your HDRI file. There's plenty of great free ones on polyhaven.com. After setting it up, come to the Render Properties panel, and under the Film tab, tick Transparent to remove the HDRI from the background but keep the lighting effect. Now that we've got our HDRI set up, let's set up the floor. Add a simple plane and scale it up, ensuring it covers the camera view from end to end. From here, set the editor type to the shader editor. Now create a new material and name it Water. First, set the metallic value to 1 and the roughness value to 0. Next, add a bump node and connect it to the normal input. Then add a noise texture and connect the factor into the height value. This will create a ripple look in your water. To get more of the look we're after, set the scale to around 25, the detail to 15, and the bump node strength to 0.2. You can further play with these settings to get the look you're after. If needed, you can also add a slight blue color to your water. Finally, come to the Material Properties tab and in the Settings tab, enable Ray Trace Transmissions. Now that our floor is set up, let's add in a nice background. To do this, head to the Pexels website and search up something like horizon or a sky background. The important things are that the image is a similar aspect ratio to your camera, and the image doesn't have anything large obscuring the background. Here's an example of what a good and bad image for our purpose looks like. Once you've found one you like, hit Download. Back inside Blender, press F4 and go to Preferences. Go to Add-ons, then search for and enable the Copy Attributes add-on. Now press Shift-A, go to Image, select Mesh Plane, and locate your sky background. With your sky plane selected, Shift-select the camera, press Ctrl-C, and select Copy Rotation. This will make sure the sky is correctly aligned to the camera. With both still selected, press Ctrl P and select Parent Object with Keeping Transforms. Now move the sky plane to the end of your floor plane and scale it up, again making sure it covers the camera view from end to end. Then switch the editor type to the UV editor. With the face selected, press G to grab and Y to lock the movement to the Y axis. Then move it up until the horizon of the sky plane aligns with the horizon of your floor plane in the 3D viewport. You may have to zoom in on the camera side to get a closer look. Once that's done, switch over to the shader editor. Connect the sky image to the emission color input and set the strength to 0.5. You may find that you have to try a few different sky images until you find one that works well. That's usually the case for me. Another important note to mention is to make sure your HDRI is of a similar color tone to your sky background. Now that our sky background is set up, let's add some artificial clouds. This is an optional step, but I find it adds a lot of depth to the scenes. We'll simply be using flat image planes of cutout clouds with transparent backgrounds. I found some good cloud images on Canva and exported them from there. These will be included in the file. Once you've got your clouds, import them into Blender as image planes, similar to how we imported the sky image. In the shader editor, connect the image color to the emission color and set the strength to 1.5. Before you start duplicating them around your scene, go to the Object Properties tab, open the Visibility tab, and untick Shadow from Ray Visibility so the clouds don't cast any unnecessary shadows on the background. All you need to do now is create a few duplicates and place them where appropriate in your scene. As an additional feature to our scene, we'll add in some cutout images of birds for our background. Again, I found this image online and simply remove the background. The image will be in the file. Import them in, similar to how we did with the clouds, and place them at an appropriate spot in your scene. After the birds have been set up, let's start adding some lights. What we'll do is have one main light to brighten the general scene, then add one or two more focused lights for our focal point. Press Shift-A, go to Lights and select Sun. Move it up somewhere where it's easy access. In the Light Settings tab, set the strength to between 1 and 2. Then in the viewport, press Shift-T, which will lock the direction of the light to your cursor. Once you're happy with how it looks, left-click to confirm. Next, let's add an area light and place it close to our island in a similar direction to our sunlight. Set the power to around 1000 and give the light a bit of saturation. You can also adjust the size if needed. And that's about it in regards to lights. You can always come back and adjust them. After setting up the lights, select your tree and go to the Modifiers tab. From here, I recommend increasing the leaf density slightly. This will cost your computer some resources. You can also increase the leaf scale, which will make the tree look more full without having to change the density. I recommend increasing both slightly. And finally, play around with some of the branch and leaf seeds to find a look that you like. Once that's set up, go to the Render Properties panel, scroll down to the bottom, and open the Color Management tab. Change the look setting to either high or medium-high contrast. Finally, all that's left to do is press F12 to render. That's everything for rendering and lighting. I'll see you guys in the final part for some compositing. Hey people, welcome to the final part of the floating island where we'll be covering compositing. Let's get started. After we rendered our image in the previous part, select the Compositing tab from the top row of editor types. First thing we'll need to do is enable the Use Nodes button up here. Next, switch to the View Layer tab on the right, and we will need to enable Mist under the Data tab, as well as Shadow and Ambient Occlusion under the Light tab. Next, right-click the top of the Dope Sheet panel and click Join Areas to give us more room to work with. The first node we'll add is a Viewer node. Then we need to connect our image output to the Viewer node image input to see what is happening to our image in the background. If you can't see your image in the background, simply press F12 to re-render and ensure Backdrop is enabled. Next, we want to add a Color Balance node before our Viewer node. We'll also want to duplicate it and set the second one's correction form to Offset, Power, Slope. Depending on the mood you're going in for your scene, set the gamma ray to that color. Warm colors for a warmer look, cooler colors for a cooler look. From here, hover over the gamma color, press Ctrl C to copy, hover over the gain color, and press Ctrl V to paste. Next, increase the slope slider just a bit to brighten things up. After that, add a color correction node and place it before your viewer node. We will use this to desaturate our shadows from the colors we just chose. All I'll be doing is setting the shadow saturation down to 0.25 and setting the midtone start to 0. To add some more pop to our highlighted areas, add a glare node before the viewer node. Set the glare type to fog glow and the quality to high. Then, set the mix value to around 0.25 and the size to 9. Just a quick note to mention, by selecting a node and pressing M, you can mute the node to see what it looks like with and without its use, so you can quickly compare between both. Next, add a lens distortion node after the glare node. This will help give more focus to the primary area of the scene. Tick Fit and set the distortion and dispersion values very low, such as 0.015 each. Now we'll create a vignette for our shot to add further focus to the focal points. First, add an ellipse mask node, as well as an alpha over node. Plug the original image into the mask value and plug the mask into the factor of the alpha over node. Now add in a blur node between the two nodes you added. Then set the filter type to fast Gaussian. Tick relative offset, set aspect correction to Y and the XY values to 7.5%. For the ellipse mask, set the width to 0.8 and set the height to 0.6. Next, plug the lens distortion into the bottom image slot of the alpha over node. Then plug the alpha over into the viewer node. Finally, set the first image slot to black. Moving on, we'll add a color ramp and duplicate it 2 times underneath. Plug the mist, shadow, and ambient occlusion into the factors of the color ramps respectively. Next, add in a mix node. We'll work on the mist setup first and set the blending mode to add. Then plug the original image into the top image slot and plug the color ramp into the bottom slot. For the shadows, duplicate the original mix node and set the blending mode to overlay. Then plug the output of the first mix node into the top image slot of the new mix node. Next, plug the color ramp of the shadow into the bottom image slot of the overlay mix node. To see the changes we're making, hold Ctrl and Shift. Then left-click the mix node to connect it to the viewer node. You'll need Node Wrangler enabled for this to work. From here, decrease the factor to what you think looks good and adjust the color ramp sliders if needed. For the ambient occlusion, duplicate the mix overlay node and set the blending mode to multiply. Connect the final color ramp to the bottom image slot and connect the mix overlay node to the top image slot. Use the same shortcut again to see the effect of the new node. Similar to the previous step, play with the other factor and the color ramp until you get something which looks good. Finally, connect the Mix Multiply node into the first Color Balance node to connect everything together. From here, go back and play with the various values until you get your look just right. What I will usually do is add a hue saturation node after the color correction node. Then increase the saturation value very slightly. Once you have everything sorted and you have the look you want, select all of the nodes between the render layers and the viewer node and move them out of view. Then press M to mute the nodes and compare the look between the composition and uncomposited image. All that's left to do now is go to the render properties, input the number of samples you want to render with, press F12 to render, and you're done. Now simply go to Image, Save As, and share it with the Blender Vitals community. I'll see you guys in the next one. Enjoy!